Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Friday's episode of Trending. I'm Jamie Ike. Today's show is brought to you by Red Life Therapy for healing at a cellular level. Head over to redlifedevices.com and use the code Ickonic for 10% off all Red Light devices. In a land, the other side of the country, Richard Willett is with us this morning. Rich, how are you doing?
Every time it's in a land down under.
It's
I'm
not a
very
land
well,
down under,
thank
though.
you.
It's more across.
Yeah, just across Skoo with. I'm very good, thank you. Some interesting news come out this morning. I'm looking forward to diving into it.
Yeah, me too, mate. Me too. There's so much to unpack this week. There's been, so many stories from different parts of the world, but obviously dominated by what's gone on in America in the last few days, which we will come to later in the show. But I understand that your first story is related to the Middle East and the company Microsoft. So let's dive into that first.
Yeah, obviously everyone who thinks of Microsoft, they're going to firstly think of Bill Gates. It's a Bill Gates startup. It was in very early days. It was helped by IBM, and anyone who knows anything about IBM, they were very much involved with the Nazis and funding their ticket machines, for want of a better word, that made the concentration camps possible. So they were very much involved with the startup of Microsoft. I think Bill Gates' mother was very much involved with people on the board. So this doesn't actually really kind of, surprise me, but maybe some others. Revealed Microsoft deepens ties with the Israeli military to provide tech support during Gaza war. So what happened wasn't much of a war. It was a genocide, but leave that to the side. Leaked documents shed light on how Israel integrated the US tech giant into its war effort to meet growing demand for cloud and AI tools. So they basically were decimating Gaza and all the poor souls that live there. And Microsoft came along and helped them out because they filled up their data banks with cloud services. Now, this is what these companies are doing. It's complicit in genocide. So I'll just read a quick bit of this. The Israeli military's reliance on Microsoft's cloud technology and artificial intelligence, that's important, systems, surged during the most intensive phase of its bombardment of Gaza, leaked documents can reveal. And you can go and have a look at that. And why this is important, because there was a system called Lavender. Now, Lavender was used. It was the AI machine directing Israeli bombs and bombing sprees in Gaza. They are using AI technology, and all of these big corporations are involved in this AI tech war. And then you see, obviously, what Trump's come out with in the last few days, building these data centers of this bizarre project, that is Stargate project. And you can see how Israel is complicit and involved with all of these big tech companies.
Well, Israel is known as the startup capital of the world, isn't it? Apart from Silicon Valley, you've got an area of Israel which is not very big. Anyone that's hear the name Israel mentioned a lot but has never looked at it on a map would assume it's this massive country that takes over the whole part of Middle East. But in fact, it's a very, very tiny country. You can drive around it in a day or so. But they've got an area called Beersheba, which is a massive military complex where companies like Facebook and Twitter and YouTube and Google and other massive tech companies that are involved in AI, Microsoft being another one, as well as lots of startup businesses. They have big data centers. They have big areas there of influence, if you like. So it's a very much intertwined with the technical world, Israel. It really is. It's a very advanced technical country, given the size of it and given the nature of the fact it's only been around since 1948. So this doesn't surprise me at all, Rich. You've only got to look at how Israel has gone from essentially a barren land of desert to one of the most technologically, economically, militarily advanced nations in the world in just half a century or so. It goes to show that, there's clearly a lot of backing, clearly a lot of money and a lot of support going into them. I mean, it's very much accepted that's what's going on. One of the first things Trump did was ban foreign aid, but not to Israel. So it's very, very appropriate, I guess, that these guys are all in bed with each other, given they're all working towards the same end. So this doesn't surprise me whatsoever. What's I think the most interesting to look at for people watching around the world is the difference between the way that this, you want to say, war has been treated versus the Ukraine-Russia war, where Russia were sanctioned, they were marginalized, they were kicked out of everything, they weren't allowed to compete in sporting events, X, Y, and Z. There's an arrest warrant out for their president and so on. Whereas Israel, they're kind of carrying on as normal, continuing to get funding, continuing to get backing, and people are still very comfortable being seen working with them when the other side, Russia's persona non grata. So it's clear that one war is very much, going to be supported and going to be allowed, and the other one is, trying to create a different end. But what do you think this is leading to then, Rich? Why do you think, these sort of things are involved?
It's really interesting what you talk about there, because obviously the connections that I look into are this religious ideology behind this push for this new world to come, world order type of thing. So Russia and Israel will be on the same card at the top levels. Putin,
They are.
At this level. So it's really interesting to see the different plays. I think they've reacted also very quickly to the response to Trump going, full on against many things he said. And we will speak about, today he's just released something that says he's going to look into the RFK, or release the JFK and Robert Kennedy
And
seniors files, and Martin Luther King, and we'll see what comes of that. It's a very interesting thing. They've been pushing this kind of backing of the CIA, a rogue CIA element being involved in it. We've interviewed people ourselves that are bringing out books about these things, so it's very interesting. I feel like it's going to be pinned on the CIA when you can clearly trace it to many different factions, including Israel, including the Vatican. He was the first, Catholic president that wanted to separate the church and state. So there's that element too.
He
so
also
that'd be
took
interesting.
On the Federal Reserve, didn't he? He wanted to create the silver certificate. He basically, in a sense, pissed off everyone. Kennedy did in many ways. I'm not saying he's a nice bloke, particularly with women. He wasn't I don't think particularly the greatest. But yeah, he kind of had, as you just mentioned there, all the different factions that didn't want him there. So I don't think it was in any way one organisation. Lyndon Johnson was almost certainly involved as well.
Yeah.
So, they're not going to release everything. They might say they've released everything, but are they going to really release something that points the eyes at Israel? They're almost certainly not, because that then, makes people look at America's greatest ally in a very different light at a time when they are basically giving Israel everything they want. And there's already people starting to go, hang on a minute, there's people, there's veterans poor in the street here in America. Why are we continuing to give money there? Why aren't we looking after our own? Add in then the fact that Kennedy is still considered to be a hero in many, many parts of America. That, add in then the fact that they were involved in his assassination, that kind of skepticism towards Israel is only going to grow. So I'd highly doubt that they would do that. But he kind of had to release the files. It's chucking some breadcrumbs to people, isn't it? He had to release them in the same way he had to pardon the January 6th rioters. It's what else he does.
Yeah.
That's the key.
And I think people should be, and we'll come back to the Middle East, this is obviously all part of it, but should be aware that obviously he was bailed out by the Rothschilds, Wilbur Ross, who's a Jesuit, way back when in the late 80s. So he's controlled by these Fed guys 100%. Anyway. So there's no way that this isn't being allowed to happen, obviously. And then when you look at, if you go to more an esoteric, occult symbolism way, look at the symbolism of RFK's memorial. It's the light, it's the spark released from inside the tusks or the husks of the Kelly pot, which is all Kabbalah. It's to do with them releasing his, for want of a better word, his Jewish spark. So there is this kind of Kabbalistic messianic angle to him. That's why you have the Statue of Liberty with the gold flame, and that's why you have a gold flame there, and with Diana as well. So there's this whole messianic agenda, and that's not indicative of 99.9% of the Jewish faith. It's this messianic guys that are all around Putin and Trump. So he was very much, that's very much an element of it. They've put their stamp on his memorial, and that's quite clear that they're saying thank you for your service, even though clearly that's not what he was trying to do.
No. Well, there's a lot of question marks about him, but certainly he did some things, and a lot of things that they didn't want, hence why they were very much keen to get rid of him in, the most blatant assassination that wasn't done by who we were told it was done by. I remember studying it in high school history when you're like 14 years old, and everyone in the class is looking around going, well, how has he been shot from behind when he got hit from the front? The most basic thing. But, everyone knows that it wasn't Lee Harvey Oswald. But who was it, and who were they working for? And I think if that whole truth came out, a lot of heads would roll, and a lot of different departments, organizations, probably even different nation states that we maybe even haven't considered, maybe even the likes of us that have researched this, will be shocked to see who and how many were involved in that. So it's a very, very interesting one, to say the least. So we're going to move on to a story here in the UK, because I appreciate this show goes out on Twitter, so it goes out right across the world. On Ickonic, we have subscribers right across the world, but we have been quite America heavy this week, which is, to be expected, given it's been a massive week. And as me and Gareth said on Tuesday's show, the world looks to America for the leadership and the direction, in a sense, because generally whatever happens in America is then rolled out across the rest of the world not too long after. But this story here, we're going to focus on the UK. Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, or Rachel from Accounts, as she's become known, has released this comment after speaking at the World Economic Forum this week. Now, when they did the budget earlier this year, they looked to remove something called non-dom status. Now, basically, for people that don't know what that is, non-dom status allows people that live in the UK, that are foreign nationals, to be registered for tax purposes in other countries. So essentially, they live in the UK, but they don't pay tax in the UK. Obviously, you're talking millionaires and billionaires. There was a lot of controversy about former Prime Minister Richie Sunak and his wife having non-dom status, which allowed her to be registered for tax in India, I believe, and not pay tax here, given we have quite a high tax rate and high corporation tax rate compared to other countries. Hence why a lot of businesses and a lot of people with wealth have their wealth and businesses registered overseas for tax purposes. Anyway, during this budget, she said she was going to remove that. The same budget they removed winter fuel payments, the same budget they put national insurance up for businesses, the same budget they put a host of increasing taxes, inheritance tax, which is going to put more people in that bracket and affect farmers and affect, therefore, food supply, and also an increase in capital gains tax, which basically, if you had the audacity to buy something that then over time may increase in value, we want tax on that profit. Yeah, again, daylight robbery. All of those are carrying on as normal. However, after her World Economic Forum visit this week, the non-dom tax, Rich, is going to be softened.
Yeah,
because they fear more billionaires and millionaires might leave the UK. Apparently, she's seen the light, mate. She spoke to enough people. She's listened to enough advice. Basically, listen to enough advice from people that have influence rather than the general public, who are actually affected by a lot of the other tax increases I've just described. So therefore, she's had a re-evaluation. Now, I'm not a communist anyway, or a socialist, Rich. I understand that people that have money and businesses therefore employ other people, and that's how economics works. I do understand that. So you don't want a system where it's so aggressive that everyone with any wealth and businesses just leaves. But in order to do that, then lower corporation tax, because that then helps every business, not just the super elite. That helps businesses from, one-man bands, man with a van, husband and wife businesses, small restaurants, hospitality businesses, every single business that would help. The national insurance, that affects every single business that employ anyone. Mm-hmm. Obviously, the bigger the business, the more it affects you, because the more people you employ. But this just affects a minority, and it only affects the super rich. So the funny thing is, Rich, if this was a Tory policy in the budget, Labour and the left would come out screaming that you're just protecting your billionaire friends. But because Labour are doing it, as far as I can see from the research I've done since this story broke yesterday, there's no backlash whatsoever at all. So again, it ties into what we spoke about previously. Not what's being done, who's doing it.
Yeah, tribalism.
Complete tribalism.
Yeah.
It's funny that she made this announcement at the WEF as well, and Trump's at the WEF yesterday. We've had that just for anyone that still thinks politics has a purpose in its current format, World Economic Forum, just look at the fact that every single leader, every single chancellor, every single home secretary, foreign secretary from nations around the world, no matter what party's in power, they all seem to be in Davos making speeches and doing X, Y, and Z there and keeping certain people happy. So this is just, again, I think a massive slap in the face, once again, to anyone that voted for Labour thinking that they were going to be the Labour of old in terms of the represent or supposedly represent the working class of Britain. Complete fabrication. They are the Tories in everything but name. In fact, even worse when it comes to these kind of policies, Tories didn't get rid of winter fuel payments, and these sort of things didn't happen under the Tories as well. So Labour are clearly in the same way Trump is in to get a side on board and then do exactly what that side don't want. But because you've invested your time and energy into that side, tribalism, as you mentioned, Rich, you don't call it out in the same way you would if the other side were doing exactly the same thing. So this story is just, again, more gaslighting of the public. And I expect to see very little backlash because people have picked their side. And the only people that will be calling this out will be the people like us and people that will be calling out Labour from day one, or calling them out before they even won the election for the fact they certainly weren't going to do the things that they said they were going to. And the second story I'm going to come to later in the show kind of ties into the same thing and the type of people that these things are attacking and ways that we can circumvent that and make sure we stand up for our fellow people. So, Rich, moving on, mate, where are we going with your second story?
Well, I just want to mention on that one, I think it's really important to understand that most people will not understand the tax system and understand how it works. It's incredibly difficult. I mean, I was watching a thing last night, and it was about some guys that made scam money off the carbon credits, and they would take 100,000 euros from this company in Europe, and then put it over to another company in Germany, and then route it back to France, and they would add the VAT on top and pocket the VAT in an account that was offshore. And it's very complicated to understand because our minds don't tend to think like that. And they were doing this over and over again on a daily basis and making a lot of money. So they have ways. And then you get the World Economic Forum pushing, obviously, the climate change scam. So they have ways of making money out of nothing. And that's what the climate, the carbon credit thing is a way of creating wealth out of thin air. They just need a reason to create wealth. And yours will be your compliance. This is the same thing. The carbon credit is compliance. How many carbon credits can you have? They don't care about the nature of the planet. If you can buy more to do more damage, it's ridiculous. So I just wanted to add that in that it's complicated, and they know that most people haven't got the time to understand that.
No, they make it complicated on purpose. They make it complicated on purpose. Like I studied economics, and I've always, been fascinated by numbers and equations and making things balance and all of that sort of stuff. Yeah, the tax code every year it changes, and when you file, whether it's as Ickonic as the business, whether you're doing VAT returns, corporation tax returns, paying employees, national insurance contributions, all of it, pension contributions, they change the rules every single year, to the point that we often joke with the accountant is it's like they're trying to trip people up. They make it so complicated so that you make mistakes, and they can go, hang on, you made a mistake. Here's a penalty.
Yeah.
That's exactly what they do. So, absolutely right. Most people won't look into that. Most people would see non-dom status and be like, well, what does that mean? That's not relevant to me, and move on to the next thing. Clue. When in truth, it's completely relevant because it just goes to show who they're happy to line the pockets of and who they're not.
Yep, absolutely. So my second story was the inventor of mRNA, Dr. Robert Malone, and I have my own questions about Dr. Robert Malone, but let's go with this story and we'll keep that in the back of our minds. Reacts to Project Stargate, and he says, I'm blown away, but not in a good way. The logic of Mr. Ellison, which we covered yesterday, and his background, so go and watch that one, is grossly naive. It's a concept well over 30 years old, and it's been repeatedly discredited. It's so naive, it wouldn't make it past the first 5 minutes of diligence of any of the venture capital firms that I have ever presented to. But here it is. So he's calling it out. It argues that the vaccine should not be the solution to cancer. The way cancer should be dealt with is with lifestyle changes, including diet, which you can't argue with. You go for the cause of it. So, it's very interesting to have someone like Robert Malone speaking out this, and to credit to InfoWars, this was on InfoWars as well, and they're speaking out against this project Stargate, and I mean that could well be because they're on board with Musk and he's speaking out against it. But it's very interesting to have the guy that was credited with inventing mRNA speaking out about this. There is some chess moves going on here in terms of the alternative media and these guys that you would lump together in this kind of Republican thing. They seem to be factioning off, and I would keep an eye on it.
Yeah, because one of the key phrases used by this cult is the best way to control the opposition is to be it, is to control it. And that's why many cases they will represent both sides. That's why if you look at the Brexit argument, you had Boris Johnson as the leader of the opposition again, the leader of the pro-Brexit campaign. Again, then he becomes prime minister. So the system was controlling the in and the out. And I imagine it would be the same here because, these guys aren't stupid. They will understand that there will be some resistance to this announcement regarding Stargate. They understand that there will be some resistance and skepticism towards artificial intelligence, even on the basic level that people think it will begin to take jobs. They might not even consider the more sinister levels of, brain chips and therefore the end of consciousness as we know it and AI doing human thinking. There will be people skeptical to that, and they know that. So therefore, rather than just ignore those concerns, for me, it would be a much more sensible choice if you are, behind this agenda to just, let people have some of these concerns, but make sure that you control the people that they are looking to for reassurance or for questions, because then you control both sides of the narrative. And as you said, I've got some questions about Robert Malone as well in relation to, obviously his involvement in mRNA technology, or as you mentioned, very key word there, Rich, credited with his involvement of mRNA technology. In the same way, you've got all of these different characters who appear to be arguing, who appear to be on slightly different pages when it comes to parts of AI, parts of vaccines, mRNA technology in general, cancer in general. Yet when it comes to the very important decisions and the very important announcements and the decisions that actually impact the direction we go in, they all seem to be on the same page. It's very much, it reminds me a lot of geopolitics in general, where rhetoric may change from person to person, but when it comes down to the crux of it, the same things happen.
Yeah.
So
absolutely,
it wouldn't shock me if this is a kind of a double play. It also, maybe it's completely genuine, and if it is, Robert Malone, fantastic, keep shouting from the rooftops. But it wouldn't shock me if this is something that is a way of controlling both sides of the narrative.
Yeah, absolutely. All roads lead to Rome, and obviously you've got the Roman Empire that never fell. I mean, a classic example is this is something I put out the other day because I was looking into your digital twin, and on one side, so you have your positive and negative charge. So your positive would be progressive. Oh my God, look, we're going with technology. We're all getting into human 2.0. It's a good thing. Your conservative, Republican, would be your kind of negative, but a soft negative. We just want to keep our traditions, So there you've got your positive and negative charges there. So on your positive side of what I call the modern day X Club, because these guys are both in the Royal Society, Demis Hassabis of DeepMind, he gives the progressive positive, we all should, embrace AI. XAI's Elon Musk gives the conservative negative charge, and he is part of the Royal Society. 2018, I believe he was inducted, and his outcome is, we need to merge with it because it could take over us. But the outcome, as you just said, the outcome to both of them is AI is going to take over, and it's inevitable. Either way, it's either going to take you with it. You can't beat them, join them, type thing. So the whole thing goes back to Thomas Huxley and the X Club, who were the club that met before the Royal Society meetings to basically set the standard of what they would talk about that night. So that's why you have X all over everything now in terms of transhumanism, which is the modern day word for eugenics, which was coined by Julian Huxley, which is the grandson of Thomas Huxley. So you are looking at the same plays, exactly what you just said there, mate. It's they give you both positive and negative charge, but control the outcome. All roads lead to Rome.
Yeah, they absolutely do. Just for people watching that have not heard of the Royal Society or Thomas Huxley, where can people go to get a bit more information on those two things?
Yeah, if you look in, just Google up Thomas Huxley and just look at his Wikipedia page, it's all there. But obviously look into his background. His son, Aldous Huxley, was Brave New World. Julian Huxley very much involved with the eugenics part of it. But then you go to Elon Musk's, whose grandfather was involved with the Technocracy Inc., all the same thing. So once you start scratching at the surface of Thomas Huxley, which is the grandfather of Julian and all this, you will start finding out that this X Club was the club he started, and that X, symbolic of Saturn, marks the spot, put it that way. So just, you can find all this information on there. It's just putting the strands together. It's not hard information to find. It's hard information to build into a picture that makes any sense. Yeah. That's what we're trying to do.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, the word that you've used there, which I think is the most interesting, as you know, I'm fascinated by psychology and mindset. and the use of language to create a certain emotion. And the word that I get when you've just spoken about, but whether it's the soft sell or the skeptical sell or the pro sell, is the inevitability of whatever happens, the outcome is the same. Whether you decide to merge with AI or whether you decide to resist it, the outcome that it is going to become more intelligent and so on than you, that's an inevitability. So what they've essentially done is they've planted the line in the flag in the sand. This is happening, whether you go with it or whether you don't. How that happens and whether that's a benefit to you or whether that's a negative to you. So like you just said then, whether you go with it and you go along with it and it takes you with it or whether you resist, that is dictated by your decision now. But the inevitability that AI is going to take over, that is exactly that, an inevitability. Nothing you can do about it. What that does psychologically is that immediately makes people think, well, resistance is futile, for one, because it's happening. So therefore, I might as well get on board with it because that sounds a bit better than being left out in the cold if I resist it. And at least if I go with it, maybe I'll get some of the benefits from it. Whereas if I resist, then, what am I going to do when there's a digital currency that AI decides whether I eat or whether I don't, and I've resisted that, or AI decides whether I can leave the house or open all those things to an extreme that, these people have talked about. It creates the mindset there that, what, if it's an inevitability, if it's going to happen anyway, then I'm just going to surrender to it, which is a complete, psychological warfare tactic, essentially, because it just makes people think, well, what's the point? No point standing up. And I see comments on things we put out online about these subjects, which is like, this is happening anyway, so what are we going to do about it? Knowing that it's dangerous, fine, but it's not changing anything. And that's the mindset they want you in. They want you to believe that resistance is futile and that standing up or resisting is just pointless. That's the mindset they need you in. Because if you're in the mindset that, actually, no, I'm not having this. I'm not having this. It's not an inevitability. It's only continuing because people's decisions are making it continue. Therefore, if we force them to stop doing that, then that inevitability changes. They don't need you in that mindset. That's not the mindset they want, because if you're thinking that way, you are a danger to their agenda. So I think that use of language there is very, very deliberate.
Very, very. Just to add, just to take that off. I mean, that's perfectly put. Is that this you are talking about prophecies here? Is exactly the same psychology of prophecies. You write the end of the story and then get people to follow the narrative, breadcrumbs, Hansel and Gretel, towards the end, and you've just hit the nail on the head there. These are prophetic things that won't happen unless we comply and build it ourselves, and that's the psychology of it. So nail on the head.
I'll change one word you said there, Rich. I wouldn't say prophetic. I'd say pathetic, because they are.
Yes, it is.
These people. Right, final story we're going to cover this morning relates in some ways to the first one that I spoke about with tax here in the UK. This is a story from the BBC this morning. Record numbers of businesses in financial distress. There's been a record jump in the number of UK businesses in critical financial distress, according to insolvency specialists. This comes at the same time there is a drop in consumer confidence, which basically means people are not spending money because they're concerned about obviously their own financial situation, as people have more concerns over the UK's financial prospects as well as their own. The numbers are a record increase of 50%, taking the number of businesses in this category to just under the 50,000 mark in the UK. Now, that's an insane number that are struggling. And the key industries, you will be shocked to hear, are things like hospitality, obviously restaurants, bars, things along those lines, which were essentially, they had shots fired at them during the COVID period, and some never got up and some did. But then with the various different increases in taxes, and also the fact that cost of living has got so high, the first thing that goes when you have a cost of living crisis is what people consider non-essentials. Well, things like eating out, things like going to the pub on a Friday night would be considered non-essentials if you compare that to, being able to feed yourself, heat your home, look after your kids, keep petrol in your car to get to work, all of those things that would be higher on the pecking order than spending money in places. So it's clear that the attack on businesses, the attack on particularly small businesses, where people would have what you would consider an independent income, where they are not reliant on either the state or reliant on a corporation for their financial security. It's been very clear for years that they have been in the gun sights of people. What you would consider to be, you have a class system, if you want to call it that, when it comes down to like economic stability. You have obviously the super rich, you have people that are doing okay for themselves where they think they're comfortable, and then you have people that are really struggling, that live paycheck to paycheck. They don't want the middle ground. They don't want the people that, you might look at and consider they're doing okay. They're doing okay for themselves. They've got some savings in the bank, their mortgage is affordable, they've got a decent job, they can go on a couple of holidays with the family each year. They might be sending their kids to private school, whatever it is. They're doing okay for themselves. They're quite comfortable. They don't want them. They want the mega rich, and they want people struggling. Because when you're struggling, that creates dependency. Dependency on the state creates control and therefore servitude towards the state. Because if you want to continue to get support, this is what you have to do in order to get it. And one of the key ways to attack that middle demographic is through attacks on small businesses, whether that be through the increase in national insurance, as I mentioned, for employers, which is going to cost companies thousands every year. We're a very small business here at Ickonic, and we've worked out that's going to cost like £12,000 a year. Think about, we employ about 10 people. Think about companies that employ 50 people, 75 people, 100 people. That's going to cost a significant amount, which is going to stop people getting pay rises, going to stop companies hiring people, and it's also going to, for businesses that just about survive, it's going to potentially tip them over the edge. So it's clear that this is part of the agenda. And the reason this is connected to the story I mentioned at the top, Rich, is that if you genuinely want to help people, this is an area where you could really support local businesses. You could really support people with independent incomes, and you could really support and encourage people to start businesses, which is how economics works. It's how economies grow. Anyone with a brain cell knows that you cannot tax your way to economic growth. You cannot tax your way to a higher standard of living. That has to come from the ground up. And you mentioned earlier, Rich, about creating wealth out of nothing, and that's what these elite do. Well, when it comes to creating, they don't really create anything. They feed off of the efforts, the imagination, and the innovative nature of humanity. They feed off of the efforts of people below. How many billionaires have corporations where they will take all these, crazy dividends out and live the life of Riley, when the idea that built the product that maybe made that company millions came from somebody in the mid-levels who's never going to see a penny of that? They're feeding off of the ideas and the imagination and the creativity of humanity. That's what they're doing. And that's exactly what governments do through things like taxation. Governments don't create anything. They feed off of the creation of the population they are supposed to represent. It's so clear that the attack on businesses is only just begun as well, which is, again, part of the agenda. It's very, very clear to see. And that's why, Rich, I brought this up today, is because I think when you know what the agenda is, you can start to plan against it. So one of the big things that I always encourage is to support and shop locally, to support your local farm, to support your local supermarket, support businesses where the name of the people that run them. They're not these nondescript corporations that, you see taking up these enormous supermarket sites where all of those things go towards somebody's seventh home in the Maldives. You go and support local businesses and local people, because that's how we essentially we circumvent this. When a few years ago the kind of attack on farming began, what you saw is a lot of local farms would start their own farm shops, even if it was quite simple. Like there's a dairy farm near me that just have a milk fridge. You go in, you put some money in an honesty jar, you take the milk. Little things like that one, create a bit of a community, and secondly, encourage people to go and shop local, support businesses in their area. And for me, that's a way of sticking two fingers up to the system, because it's doing the opposite of what they want.
There's so much going on there that it hits on so many different levels, doesn't it? And as you said, one of the most important things you said there was you've done well for yourself. you've done well for yourself. It's the last thing they want is you doing well for yourself.
Yep.
And that's the big term that frightens the life out of them because they can't do well for themselves. It's the Indian caste system. The triangle's upside down. It's the bottom level is the foundation, which we all are. We're the foundation of everything that the top level, the tiny lot, they don't have anything. They don't have any skills, any abilities. And the key word is parasite for me.
Oh, complete
They're parasites.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're absolute parasites. And this is why we live in a satanic, inverted world, for want of a better term. Everything is upside down, topsy-turvy land. And what you were saying there about the taxation, and what it really does as well is it stops you going anywhere. It keeps you in your house. You can't afford to go on holidays. You can't travel. So what better way to imprison someone in their home than stop them being able to afford to go out of it? It's separating people. It's fragmenting communities and then putting them in one large bricks-like block, which is your new world order.
Yep.
So you can see it hitting on so many different levels, this attack on the middle class that are kind of just almost getting out of, because once they get out of, because it's a trickle-down economy, we can get out of, because obviously they'll have businesses that will work with us to go and say, I count my dad was a greengrocer. It's we can go and supply food for them, or we can go and do their electricity. We can do, the working men's jobs there will be more available because they'll have more places need to be fixed. More jobs will happen. So it's a trickle down economy. So they want to block that off in an Indian caste system. And that's exactly what they're doing. So as you said earlier on, perfect example was to soften that tax thing. And them guys, that example I gave earlier about this carbon credits thing, the guys that went to prison for that were lower end guys. They were the guys that were scamming from the government, taking tax money, but the government is scamming from everybody.
They are.
So do you know what I mean? It's kind of like two thieves having a go over which, however powerful they are in the theft system that we live in.
Completely. And that's the joke of it. If you say you subscribe to a business to do something and they didn't do what was in the subscription, the terms and conditions stated they were going to do this with your money and they did the opposite, you could demand a refund. You could then take legal action. Yet governments get elected based on certain claims. Our tax then goes to that government, and most people voted them in based on the claims they were going to that they put forward of what they were going to do with tax, and then they do the exact opposite. But as far as I'm aware, there's not really a complaints department. There's certainly not one that actually does anything, which just goes to show the absolute disparity of it all. It's absolutely insane, absolutely insane.
Add to that, and a perfect example of that was, and I know this is a deeper level, Donald Trump not swearing on the Bible. He knows that he's just lying. He's not going to lie like that and then put his hand on there. He knows he's lying, and he knows he's his last term in anyway. So, that's an example of they're selling you an empty basket of goods. Absolutely.
They are, and the best way to get around it is to take power out of their hands and go back to community-based living, in the sense of, people supporting things in your local area. And when it comes to businesses, one of the best ways to do that, as I mentioned, is to shop local. So this weekend, what I'd encourage everyone to do, go to your local farm, go to your local cafe, go to your local pub, your local restaurant, whatever it is that's around you, and go and just try and support them if you can, because that's what we need. We need more and more people to support local, so therefore they continue to survive and hopefully thrive, and we can take these corporations down along the way by simply not continuing to feed into their economic situation. As I mentioned in one of my shows a few months ago, people stopped buying Coke. 2 days, Coca-Cola are bankrupt. 2 days if the whole world stopped buying Coke. That's how fragile they are. Also goes to show just how many people must buy Coke every day. But it just goes to show how fragile these things are. And the best way to hit them is with your wallet, and stop spending money in corporations that are only there to try and further this agenda for human enslavement. But that's it for us this morning, Rich, I believe.
Yep.
It's a pleasure as always to talk to you, mate. And it's been good fun. We're now at the end of third week of trending. So as always, we'll ask any comments, any feedback, please put it in the comments wherever you are watching this, whether that's on Ickonic, whether that's on Twitter, whether that's on Rumble, YouTube, and wherever you are in the world. It'd be great to get as many bits of feedback as we can, because after all, this is your show and we want to bring you information that you want to hear every single day. So thanks, Rich, for this morning, and we will be back with you again on Monday. Today's show was brought to you in association with Ape Nutrition, bringing British organic food supplements onto the market. Head over to apenutrition.co.uk and use code Ickonic Media for 10% off the range. We'll be back on Monday. Until then, have a fantastic weekend. Bye for now.
Bye.